Well, hello everyone. It's me again. It's been a long time, but I'm back with some more pottery videos. It's summertime, so it's time to make some pottery. So I'm going to start back up with a very simple mug. Mugs are kind of like a go-to for any potter out there. If you can't make a mug, you probably shouldn't be throwing. No, I'm just kidding. You should throw it no matter what. It's so much fun. But mugs are pretty simple. I'm just going to start out with probably like a pound to a pound and a quarter. I don't really measure my clay anymore. I just kind of go by taking a 25-pound block of clay and then chopping it up into sections, and then those sections become different things, whether they're smaller mugs or bigger bowls. So these guys, I'm guessing, are about a pound to a pound and a quarter worth of clay. You can see here I've kind of not really going the supersonic speed that I usually am when it comes to these videos. I've kind of slowed things down a little bit because it doesn't take me long to throw these, so it's not really a long video here. But you know, usually a mug for me is centering and then maybe one or, well, not one, two or three pulls that give me a good decent height. You know, when they're wet, they're usually, I would say, 5 inches tall, and then when they dry to about 4 inches, which is, I think, is a pretty good mug size for me. I've been trying to narrow down how big I want my mugs to be. I've made a series of mugs that are way too small and made a series of mugs that are way too big, and I think these are just right. At least they seem to be popular as in they've sold in the last few times. So as you can see here, I've got the height that I want. Now I'm just taking this plastic rib tool, which is a great tool to kind of smooth everything out and get the shape that you want. I've got a variety of tools here to kind of give this a little lip. I know I'm kind of zoomed in pretty tight on here, but I wanted to show what my fingers were doing as I was pulling on these videos. So I'm kind of a little tighter than I usually am with the GoPro camera, but I guess with that kind of camera you can get in pretty close, which is nice. So I'm just kind of doing the typical smoothing everything out, running the chamois tool over the rim to make sure you don't want any sharp edges on your rim, and then just kind of getting rid of all that extra slip. I'll come back in with the wooden tool, which I tell all my students is called the Frank tool, although I don't know why. It's just the name that stuck. It's the wooden tool. Just going to get rid of some of this extra clay at the bottom, and then this guy will be ready to put a handle on. Now, I'm always kind of like curious, maybe you guys in the comment section kind of figure out, when do you add the handle? I mean, obviously I want to add it when it's somewhat cheddar cheesy, but I still haven't turned this guy over to trim yet. The rim usually dries faster than the base, so it's always kind of a big thing for me. So I've started definitely to start pulling these handles while they're on the cup, which is kind of been a nice way to do it. Usually sometimes I'll just pull them off to the side, then attach both ends, but then that usually means you're smushing one end and it never really turns out right. So putting it on one side and then coming back and then just pulling it off that and then adding to the bottom seems to do the best here. So you can see I can trim, and I'm using my new trimming tool, which is nice. It kind of centers everything up for you automatically. But this is probably a little more wet than I would usually trim it because it hasn't really had a chance to dry too much. But anyway, that's okay. Obviously I have to be very, very careful when I trim the sides over here not to go down too far and trim my handle right off, which would be devastating. So I'm just trying to get the basic bottom here, which is fine because I took a lot of that clay off with the Frank tool earlier. So coming back in, just kind of adding a small little foot onto this. Again, always tapping the bottom to check for the thickness of the mug. Obviously you don't want to go too far, and I tell my students all the time that if it's a thump thump, then it's still pretty thick, but if it's a tap tap, you're getting kind of thin. So I kind of go back and forth with a variety of tools. I usually start with the bigger tool to kind of get rid of most of my clay, and then come back with this finer tool to kind of refine everything I want. Taking a sponge, getting rid of all those tool marks. Sometimes I'll just use my finger, depending on the wetness of the clay. A sponge will work just fine too. So that's about how quick it is. I'll go back over this one more time with the sponge and just kind of clean everything up, because this is the part that really shows up on a lot of glazes. If you don't go through at the very end here and just kind of touch everything up with the sponge, all those tiny little marks can really show up on a glaze, and it's like the most important step that any potter can do, is to go through at the very end and just clean it all up. It's kind of like sanding wood. If you try to put a stain on unsanded wood, it's going to look really sloppy and messy. So you have to go through and take that extra time at the end to sand everything to make sure it's nice and smooth. Otherwise, it's going to look pretty bad at the end here. So just a little touch up at the end, and then all my glaze will attach nicely. So when it comes to this one, I used two different kind of glazes here. I used a deep fire brick red and an Albee slip brown. Now my deep fire brick red is a dipping glaze, so I just dunked the whole thing in the red, and then I added some Albany slip brown pretty much over the entire thing. Now you can see here that it's kind of like patchy and slid down a little bit. So the dipping glazes just don't hold brush on glazes very well, and I'm kind of learning that they need to be kind of put on by themselves. So simply a nice simple little mug here, some interesting colors, and really it's just back to be back on YouTube. It's great to be back on YouTube again. So look forward to more videos, and I will talk to you guys then.